The silence in my apartment was a physical thing. It had weight, pressing down on my shoulders, seeping into the worn fabric of the sofa where I spent most of my evenings. It was a silence composed of the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of traffic, and the complete absence of another human heartbeat. For 3 years, since I'd moved to this city for a remote data processing job that required nothing of me but my fingers and my acquiescence to solitude, this silence had been my most constant companion. My life was a series of quiet, repeating loops. Wake, work, eat, scroll, sleep. A grayscale existence. My reflection in the darkened laptop screen showed a man I barely recognized. His hair was too long, curling over his ears and threatening to obscure his eyes. It was the physical manifestation of my neglect, a shaggy testament to how long it had been since I'd felt the need to present myself to the world. My usual barber, a kind old man named Sal who smelled of talcum powder and never asked too many questions, had retired. His shop, a relic of a bygone era, was now a soulless juice bar. I'd let my hair grow for 2 months, using Sal's retirement as an excuse for my own inertia. But now, it was becoming a problem. It was a visible sign that I had let things go. A text from my only real work friend, Clara, lit up my phone. "Tried that new barber yet? The one I told you about? Julian's. He's an artist. You'll thank me." I hadn't tried him. The thought of a new place, a new person making small talk, a new set of hands in my hair, was exhausting. It was a disruption to the carefully curated emptiness of my routine. But looking at the stranger on my screen, I knew I had to do something. The inertia was winning. The next day, I found the shop tucked between a laundromat and a dusty antique store. The sign was simple, hand-painted gold letters on a black background, Julian's. Cuts and shaves. A striped pole turned slowly, its red, white, and blue chasing each other in a hypnotic, endless spiral. It felt like stepping back in time, but in a different way than Sal's. This place had an edge to it. It felt deliberate, curated. Pushing the heavy wooden door open, a small bell chimed. The air inside was thick with a scent I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't just the sterile, powdery smell of a standard barbershop. There was something else underneath it, a warm, masculine scent of bay rum, cedar, and old leather, all mingling with the faint, clean aroma of antiseptic. 2 ornate, dark red leather chairs faced a wall of mirrors, their chrome fixtures gleaming under the warm Edison bulbs. The floor was black and white tile, and dark wood paneling covered the walls, adorned with vintage boxing posters and framed black and white photographs of men with sharp side parts and stoic expressions. A man was sweeping hair into a dustpan, his back to me. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across a broad back. His arms were covered in intricate tattoos, black ink swirling up from his wrists and disappearing under his rolled-up sleeves. He moved with an unhurried, economical grace. When he turned, the first thing I noticed was his eyes. They were a deep, clear brown, and they met mine with a directness that was almost startling. He had a strong jawline, covered in a neat, dark stubble, and his hair was cut short and sharp. A small, almost imperceptible scar cut through his left eyebrow. "Be with you in a second," he said. His voice was a low, calm rumble that seemed to settle in my chest. It was a voice that matched the shop, steady, classic, no nonsense. I nodded, my own voice suddenly feeling like a foreign object in my throat, and took a seat on the worn leather couch in the small waiting area. I picked up a magazine, pretending to read, but my attention was fixed on him. This had to be Julian. He finished sweeping, wiped his hands on a towel, and then turned fully toward me. A slow smile spread across his face, not a wide, performative grin, but a small, confident smirk that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "What can I do for you?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Just a haircut?" I managed, the words sounding small in the quiet space. He gestured to the empty chair. "Come on over." The leather of the barber chair was cool against my back. He draped a heavy, pinstriped cape around my shoulders, his knuckles brushing against the side of my neck as he fastened it. The touch was brief, professional, but it sent a jolt through my system. It was the first time someone had touched me with any kind of intention in months. He stood behind me, his reflection meeting mine in the mirror. His gaze was intense, analytical, as he combed his fingers through my overgrown hair. I could feel the slight roughness of calluses on his fingertips against my scalp. "Been a while," he observed, his tone neutral. "My usual guy retired," I explained, my eyes fixed on my own anxious face in the mirror. "Sal?" he asked. I looked up at his reflection, surprised. "Yeah, you knew him. Good man. Taught me a few things when I was starting out." He picked up a pair of scissors, the steel glinting in the warm light. The sound of them snipping through the air was sharp and clean. "So, what are we thinking? Just a trim, or are you looking for a change?" "Just clean it up," I said, feeling hopelessly uninspired. "Off the ears, tidy up the back." He nodded, his expression unreadable in the mirror. "All right, we can do that." He started to work, and I fell into a state of protracted observation. I watched his hands. They were steady and sure, the scissors an extension of his fingers. He moved around the chair with a fluid, practiced rhythm, his body occasionally brushing against my shoulder or arm. Each point of contact was a tiny spark against the backdrop of my touch-starved existence. I found myself tracking the lines of ink on his forearms, a detailed compass on one, a winding serpent on the other. I wondered about their stories, about the person who wore them. The only sounds were the rhythmic snip-snip of the scissors and the low hum of the clippers when he moved to the back of my neck. He didn't force small talk, and for that, I was intensely grateful. The silence wasn't empty like the one in my apartment. It was a comfortable, working silence. It allowed me to exist in the space without the pressure of performance. I watched his face in the mirror, the way his brows furrowed in concentration, the slight purse of his lips as he measured a line. He caught me looking once, and that small, knowing smirk returned for a fleeting moment before his focus went back to his work. My stomach did a slow, nervous flip. I dropped my gaze, a hot flush creeping up my neck. I was being too obvious. I was the lonely man, staring with pathetic intensity at the handsome barber. The narrative wrote itself. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, he put the scissors down. He ran the clippers over the nape of my neck, the vibration a low hum against my skin. Then he took a small, soft brush and a container of white powder. He gently tilted my head forward with a firm hand on my shoulder. "All right, almost done," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. He began to dust the loose hairs from my neck. His movements were methodical, gentle. Then he paused. His other hand came up, his thumb and forefinger catching my jaw, holding me still. His thumb rested just below my ear, his forefinger along the line of my chin. The warmth of his skin was immediate, grounding. My breath hitched. He leaned in slightly, his head next to mine as he inspected his work in the mirror. I could smell his cologne now, a subtle, clean scent like freshly cut wood and something spicy, maybe peppercorn. It was intoxicating. "Don't move," he said, his voice a low, private rumble meant only for me. He adjusted the collar of my shirt, pulling the fabric slightly away from my neck. His fingers brushed against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. He looked at my reflection, his dark eyes holding mine. "Looks better open." My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to decipher the meaning behind those three simple words. "Looks better open." Was he talking about my shirt collar? Just making a professional, stylistic observation? Or was it something else? A suggestion? A statement? A test? His thumb stroked lightly against my jaw, a barely there movement that felt earth-shatteringly intimate. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken possibilities. Just us. My heart picked up pace. Then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. He released my jaw, stepped back, and gave a final, brisk whisk with the brush. He unfastened the cape, shaking it out with a sharp snap of fabric. "All set," he said, his tone back to its easy, professional calm. I stood up on shaky legs, my neck tingling where his hand had been. I looked in the mirror. The haircut was perfect. It was sharp and clean, framing my face in a way that made me look less like a hermit and more like a person who lived in the world. But it wasn't the haircut I was focused on. It was the memory of his touch, the echo of his words. I paid in a daze, my fingers fumbling with the cash. Our hands brushed as he gave me my change. Another spark. Another jolt to my dormant nervous system. "Come back in 4 weeks," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a soft-spoken command. "Don't let it get away from you again." "I won't," I promised, my voice hoarse. I walked out of the shop and back into the gray afternoon, but the world felt different. It was as if he had turned up the saturation. The air was sharper, the colors of the city more vivid. The silence of my apartment was waiting for me, but now, it was filled with the memory of a low voice, a warm hand, and 3 words that I would spend the next 4 weeks turning over and over in my mind, analyzing them from every possible angle, searching for a meaning I desperately hoped was there. The next 4 weeks were a study in obsession. I replayed the entire haircut in my mind 100 times. I became an expert in the memory of Julian. I could recall the exact pattern of the tattoos on his right forearm, the way the light caught the silver of his scissors, the precise timbre of his voice when he'd said, "Don't move." The phrase "looks better open" became a mantra, a riddle I was determined to solve. My work, usually a monotonous refuge, became an exercise in distraction. I would stare at spreadsheets, but instead of numbers, I'd see the dark brown of his eyes. I'd type reports, and my fingers would remember the feeling of his hand on my jaw. I started dressing better for my trips to the grocery store, as if he might somehow see me. I started wearing collared shirts, and I always left the top button undone. A small, foolish act of hope. I analyzed every micro-expression I could remember. The smirk, was it friendly? Flirtatious? Or just his default expression for new customers? The intensity in his eyes, was it professional focus or personal interest? The way he'd held my jaw, was it simply a barber's technique for keeping a client still, or was it a possessive, deliberate gesture? I swung wildly between 2 poles of thought. One moment, I was convinced he was flirting with me, that there was an undeniable current between us. The next, I was drowning in self-recrimination, certain I had imagined everything, that I was just another lonely man projecting his desires onto a handsome stranger doing his job. The touch had been the most potent piece of evidence. It lingered. In my state of profound physical isolation, his touch was like a downpour in a drought. I could still feel the exact pressure of his thumb on my jaw, the slight rasp of his skin against mine. It was a brand. I'd touch the spot sometimes, just to see if I could conjure the ghost of the sensation. It was a pathetic gesture, I knew, but it was all I had. I started walking a different route home from my errands, a route that took me past his shop. I never looked in directly. I would glance at the striped pole, watch it turn, and my heart would beat a little faster. I'd see the warm light spilling onto the sidewalk in the evenings and imagine him inside, sweeping up the last of the day's hair, the scent of bay rum hanging in the air. I was pathetic, a stalker in the making, but I couldn't help it. He had introduced a spark of color into my monochrome life, and I was drawn to it like a moth. Finally, the day of the 4-week mark arrived. I had circled it on my calendar. I spent an hour getting ready, changing my shirt 3 times before settling on a simple, dark blue button-down. I left the top button open. My hands were clammy as I walked to the shop. What if he didn't remember me? What if the whole thing had been a figment of my overactive imagination? What if the easy intimacy was just his professional chairside manner, something he deployed with every client? The bell chimed as I entered, the sound now familiar, comforting. Julian was finishing with another customer, an older man with a neatly trimmed white beard. He caught my eye in the mirror and gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a flamboyant greeting, but it was a clear sign of recognition. He remembers me. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. "Be right with you, Leo," he said. He knew my name. I hadn't told him my name. I must have used my card to pay last time. Of course. Still, hearing him say it, the 2 syllables rolling off his tongue in that low, rumbling voice, felt significant. I sat on the leather couch, the same spot as before, and this time I didn't even pretend to look at a magazine. I just watched him. He was laughing at something the older man said, a genuine, deep laugh that made his whole body shake slightly. The sound was rich and warm. He finished the shave with a hot towel, his movements precise and caring. He treated the old man with a gentle respect that I found incredibly endearing. It wasn't just a job for him. It was a craft, a service. When the man left, Julian turned to me, wiping his straight razor on a piece of leather. "Right on time," he said, that small smirk playing on his lips. I was about to send out a search party. My face grew warm. "You said 4 weeks." "I did," he confirmed, gesturing to the chair. "Glad to see you listen." I settled into the chair, and he draped the cape around me. This time, when his knuckles brushed my neck, I was prepared for it, but the jolt was just as strong. He stood behind me, and our eyes met in the mirror again. His gaze seemed to linger a little longer this time. "The usual?" he asked, his hands resting on my shoulders. The weight of them was solid, comforting. "Yes, please," I said. He began to work, and the familiar, comfortable silence descended again. But this time, it felt different. It was charged with the memory of our last encounter. I was hyper-aware of his every movement, every casual brush of his arm against mine, every time his fingers grazed my scalp. My internal monologue was running at full speed, a frantic stream of analysis and hope. About halfway through the cut, he broke the silence. "How's the data processing world?" The question caught me off guard. "Oh, it's the same. Quiet. You like quiet," he stated, more than asked. "I guess so," I admitted. He paused his cutting, leaning one hip against the counter beside my chair. He looked at me in the mirror, his expression serious. "You ever get tired of it?" The quiet. His perception was unnerving. It was as if he could see right through the carefully constructed walls I'd built around myself. He saw the loneliness I tried so hard to disguise as a preference for solitude. "Sometimes," I answered honestly, my voice barely a whisper. He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly and went back to cutting my hair. The conversation was over, but it hung in the air between us. He had seen something in me, a crack in the facade, and instead of ignoring it, he had pressed on it gently, testing its strength. The rest of the haircut passed in that charged silence. He finished, as before, with the clippers and the soft brush. My entire body tensed as he reached for the talcum powder. I watched his reflection, my heart pounding in anticipation. Would he do it again? He tilted my head forward. He dusted my neck. And then, his hand came up to my jaw. It was the same grip, the same warm, firm pressure. My breath caught in my throat. This time, it felt even more deliberate. It wasn't a surprise, it was a repetition, a confirmation. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur against my ear. "Still looks better open." He wasn't just talking about my shirt. I knew it. I was sure of it now. This was a message, sent directly to me, coded in the language of gesture and subtext. He was telling me something, and he was waiting for me to understand. His thumb stroked my jaw again, that same impossibly gentle motion. It was a question, an invitation. I didn't know how to respond. The years of solitude had robbed me of my social fluency. I was terrified of misreading the signs, of making a fool of myself. So I did what I always did. I said nothing. I just sat there, frozen, my pulse thundering in my ears. He held the position for a beat longer, his dark eyes searching mine in the mirror, and then he seemed to come to a decision. He pulled away, his expression becoming unreadable again. The moment was broken. The charge dissipated, leaving behind a residue of confusion and regret. I had failed the test. He had offered an opening, and I had been too scared to walk through it. I paid, my movements stiff and awkward. The easy camaraderie from the beginning of the appointment was gone. The air was thick with my failure. "See you in 4 weeks, Leo," he said, but his voice lacked the teasing warmth it had held before. It was just professional, distant. I walked home, a hollow feeling in my chest. I had been right. There was something there, and I had been too cowardly to acknowledge it. The silence in my apartment felt different that night. It was no longer a quiet companion. It was an accusation. It mocked me with the memory of what I had been too afraid to grasp. I had been given a chance to break the grayscale monotony of my life, and I had let it slip through my fingers. The following month was a torment of my own making. I was haunted by my inaction. Julian's words, "You ever get tired of it?" The quiet echoed in my head. Yes, I was tired of it. I was suffocating in it. He had offered me a lifeline, and I had been too paralyzed by fear to take it. Every day, I considered walking into the shop, not for a haircut, but just to what? Apologize for my silence? Try to explain the years of self-imposed isolation that had rendered me mute in the face of genuine connection? The scenarios I played out in my head were all disastrous, ending in my own humiliation. My next appointment loomed. I dreaded it. I was sure the tentative bridge between us had been burned. He would be polite, professional, and distant. The charged silence would be replaced by a truly awkward one. The meaningful touches would become strictly functional. I had ruined it. I almost canceled. The day before, I had my finger hovering over the call button, ready to invent a flimsy excuse. But then I looked at my reflection. My hair was starting to get shaggy again. It was a symbol of my retreat, my surrender to the gray. No, I couldn't let the inertia win again. I had to face him, even if it was just to endure the awkwardness I had created. When I walked in, the shop was empty. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large front window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Julian was sitting in one of the barber chairs, leaning back, a book resting on his chest. He looked up as the bell chimed, and his expression was neutral. Not cold, but not warm either. Guarded. "Leo," he said, sitting up and placing the book on the counter. "You're early." "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. He just nodded. "Have a seat." The silence as he prepared his station was heavy, brittle. I sat in the chair, my back ramrod straight. He draped the cape around me without a word. The usual comfort of the ritual was gone, replaced by a tense formality. He started cutting, his movements efficient and impersonal. Our eyes didn't meet in the mirror. He was all business. My heart sank. This was it. This was the new normal. I had squandered my chance. The internal monologue that had been screaming for weeks fell silent, replaced by a dull ache of resignation. He worked quickly, the snip of the scissors the only sound. I braced myself for the end, for the curt dismissal and the long, lonely walk home. He was finishing up the edges, his focus entirely on the line of my hair. He didn't seem to be paying me any mind at all. Then, something unexpected happened. As he was trimming around my right ear, his hand, the one holding the comb, slipped. The fine-toothed edge of the comb scraped sharply against the sensitive skin of my earlobe. It was a small thing, but it stung. Ow! I flinched, the sound escaping me before I could stop it. Julian froze instantly. The scissors stopped moving. He pulled back, his eyes wide with concern. "Shit. Sorry. Did I get you?" He gently tilted my head, his fingers surprisingly soft as he inspected my ear. There was a tiny red scratch, already welling with a pinprick of blood. "Damn it," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He sounded genuinely upset. "I'm so sorry, Leo." My hand slipped. He moved to a cabinet and came back with a cotton ball and a small bottle of antiseptic. His movements were no longer impersonal. They were focused, caring. He dabbed the antiseptic on the tiny cut, his touch incredibly gentle. "Is that okay?" he asked, his face close to mine. His brow was furrowed with worry. "It's fine," I said, my voice quiet. "Really, it's just a scratch." But it wasn't just a scratch. It was a break. A crack in the wall of formality he had erected between us. In that moment, he wasn't the cool, confident barber. He was just a man who had made a mistake and felt bad about it. It was a moment of vulnerability, a moment of softness. He finished cleaning the cut and straightened up, but he didn't immediately go back to work. He just stood there, looking at me in the mirror. The guarded expression was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. "I got distracted," he said, his voice low. He wasn't talking about the haircut. This was it. Another opening. A different kind this time. Not a flirtatious test, but a moment of shared, awkward humanity. I couldn't let this one pass. I had to say something. Anything. I took a deep breath. "Julian," I began, my voice shaky. I met his eyes in the mirror. "I'm sorry about last time." He stilled, his gaze sharpening. "What for?" "For not saying anything." I struggled, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "When you know." A long silence stretched between us. He didn't pretend not to understand. He just watched me, his expression unreadable, letting me stumble through my confession. "I'm not good at this." I finally managed, looking down at my hands, clenched into fists in my lap. "I spend too much time in my own head. I overthink everything. And when you touched my jaw, I froze." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heart beating, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I had laid myself bare. I had admitted my fear, my social ineptitude, my obsession with his small gestures. I waited for the polite dismissal, the gentle letdown. Instead, I heard him take a slow, deep breath. He moved from behind me to stand in front of me, turning the chair slightly so I was facing him. He crouched down, bringing himself to my eye level. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, caging me in. "Leo," he said, and his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting for you to say something? My head snapped up. I stared at him, my mind reeling. What? That first day you walked in here, he continued, a wry smile touching his lips. You looked like a man who hadn't been seen in a very long time. And you looked at me, the way you're looking at me right now. He shook his head slightly. I've been dropping hints the size of anvils. I was beginning to think you were just completely oblivious. I'm not oblivious, I whispered. I'm a coward. No, he said, his voice firm. He reached out, his hand covering one of my clenched fists on the armrest. His warmth seeped into my cold skin, and my fingers instinctively uncurled, lacing with his. You're not a coward. You're careful. There's a difference. He squeezed my hand. I was about to give up. I thought maybe I'd read it all wrong. That's why I was distracted. I was in my own head for a change. We just looked at each other for a long moment, his hand holding mine, the air thick with everything that had been left unsaid for the past 2 months. The fear and anxiety that had been my constant companions began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. He had seen me. All this time, while I was observing him, analyzing his every move, he had been doing the same to me. He had seen the loneliness I thought I had hidden so well, and he hadn't been repelled by it. He had been drawn to it. So, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. Now that we've established that we're both idiots, a laugh bubbled up out of me, a genuine, startled sound. It felt rusty and used. His smile widened. What do you say we finish this haircut, and then you let me lock up the shop and buy you a beer? It was a simple question, but it felt monumental. It was the door I had been afraid to walk through, now standing wide open. I'd like that, I said, my voice filled with a relief so profound it was almost painful. I'd like that very much. He gave my hand one last squeeze before standing up. He returned to his position behind me, and our eyes met in the mirror. The reflection was different now. We weren't a barber and his client anymore. We were two men who had finally, clumsily, found their way onto the same page. He picked up the scissors, but before he made the final snip, he leaned in close again, his breath warm against my ear. For the record, he murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble. I meant it. It really does look better open. This time, I didn't freeze. I smiled. Julian finished the haircut with a renewed sense of purpose, his movements once again fluid and confident, but now they were imbued with a different kind of energy. The touches were no longer ambiguous tests. They were affirmations. When he brushed a stray hair from my forehead, his fingers lingered for a fraction of a second too long. When he adjusted the cape, his hand rested on my shoulder, a solid, reassuring weight. I didn't analyze these moments. I simply felt them, allowing the warmth to spread through me, chasing away the last of the chill that had settled in my bones for so long. After the last snip, he didn't immediately move to brush me off. He just stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, and we looked at our reflections together. I saw a man whose face was flushed with a nervous excitement, whose eyes were brighter than they had been in years. And behind him, I saw a man with a soft, genuine smile, his gaze steady and warm. We looked right together. He finally stepped back, breaking the spell. All right, let me just clean this up, and we can get out of here. While he swept the floor, I sat on the leather couch, the place where my anxious vigil had started. I watched him move around the space that was so intrinsically his. It was more than just his workplace. It was an extension of him. The old-world charm, the masculine scent, the quiet, steady competence, it was all Julian. He wiped down the counters, put his tools away in their designated spots, and finally, he flipped the sign on the door from open to closed. The click of the lock was a definitive sound. It sealed us inside, separating us from the rest of the world for a few precious moments. There's a little pub around the corner, he said, pulling off his gray t-shirt, which was dusted with tiny flecks of my hair. Underneath, he wore a simple black tank top that showed off the full, intricate tapestry of his tattoos. My breath caught. He tossed the shirt onto a chair and turned to me. Not too loud. Good beer. Sound good. Sounds perfect, I said, finding my voice. He grabbed his wallet and keys from a drawer. Ready? I stood up, and as I walked toward him, a wave of unreality washed over me. This was actually happening. I wasn't just observing my life from a distance anymore. I was in it. I was about to walk out of this shop, this sanctuary of my quiet obsession, and into the world with the man who occupied my every thought. He held the door for me, and we stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The city was alive with the hum of evening traffic and the chatter of people heading home from work. It was the same scene I witnessed every day, but tonight, it felt brand new. The pub was exactly as he described it. Cozy, dimly lit, with dark wood and the smell of old beer soaked into the floorboards. We found a small booth in the corner, and the worn leather was a familiar comfort. A waitress came and took our order. Julian didn't even look at the menu. 2 IPAs, he said, and then looked at me. Unless you want something else. IPA is great, I said. It was what I would have ordered. When the waitress left, a silence fell between us. It was different from the silences in the shop. Out here, without the familiar ritual of the haircut to structure our interaction, it felt more charged, more uncertain. My old anxieties began to creep back in. What do we talk about? What if I'm boring? What if, outside the context of his shop, he finds me completely uninteresting? As if sensing my panic, Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. So, Leo, he began, his voice low and easy, cutting through the background noise of the pub. Tell me about the numbers. What do they do all day? The question was simple, but the genuine curiosity in his eyes made me want to answer it properly. I started talking about my job, about the spreadsheets and the data sets. I tried to make it sound more interesting than it was, but he just listened patiently, his gaze never leaving my face. It sounds orderly, he said when I finished. It's very orderly, I agreed. Predictable. Safe. And you're tired of safe? He said, echoing our earlier conversation. I think I am, I admitted. It was the first time I had said it out loud. The beers arrived, and we both took a long drink. The cold, bitter liquid helped to soothe my nerves. I decided it was my turn. What about you? I asked. How does someone become a barber who knows about old masters like Sal? A shadow passed over his face, just for a second, before being replaced by that familiar, wry smile. The long version or the short version? I've got time, I said, surprising myself with my own boldness. He took another sip of his beer, gathering his thoughts. The short version is, I used to be in a much less orderly line of work. The kind of work that doesn't leave a lot of room for a future. He paused, looking down at the tattoos on his arms. I needed a change. A big one. My grandfather was a barber. I spent a lot of time in his shop when I was a kid. I always loved it. The smell, the sound of the scissors, the way men would come in looking one way and leave looking better, sharper, more confident. He looked up at me. It's a craft. It's honest work. You take something messy and you make it clean. You bring order to it. There's no ambiguity. It's real. I understood completely. My job was the opposite. It was abstract, numbers on a screen that represented things I never saw. His work was tangible. He transformed people, even in a small way, with his own 2 hands. When I got out, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, I needed something real. Sal's shop was a few towns over. I went to him, told him my story. He took a chance on me. Taught me everything he knew about the craft, and a hell of a lot about being a decent man. When he retired, I opened my own place. Tried to build something that would have made him proud. His admission was a gift. It was a piece of his past, a glimpse into the vulnerability he kept hidden beneath his confident exterior. He wasn't just the handsome, flirtatious barber. He was a man who had remade his life, who had sought out order and honesty and found it in a pair of scissors and a straight razor. He would be proud, I said, and I meant it. Your shop, it feels like a legacy. He looked at me, a real, unguarded smile spreading across his face. Thanks, Leo. We talked for hours. We finished our beers and ordered another round. He asked me about the city I'd moved from, about my family. I asked him about the stories behind his tattoos. He told me the compass was for finding his way, and the serpent was a reminder of an old skin he'd shed. The conversation flowed easily, naturally. The awkward, overthinking part of my brain finally went quiet, content to just be present in the moment. I learned that his quiet confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the hard-won stillness of a man who had weathered storms I couldn't imagine. I learned that his perceptive gaze came from years of having to read people quickly and accurately. And I learned that the gentleness in his hands was a conscious choice, a deliberate counterpoint to a past that had been anything but gentle. By the time we left the pub, the sky was dark, spangled with the faint, hazy stars of the city. We walked in a comfortable silence through the quiet streets. My apartment was only a few blocks away. As we approached my building, a familiar anxiety began to prickle at the edges of my newfound ease. This was the end of the night. What happened now? A handshake? A clumsy goodbye? We stopped in front of the main door. The street was empty, bathed in the orange glow of a single streetlight. "Well," I said, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. "This is me." "I figured," Julian said, a small smile on his face. He didn't move. He just stood there, looking at me, his dark eyes searching my face in the dim light. The air between us was thick with unspoken questions. The tipping point. The moment where the evening could either end, or it could become something more. I thought about my silent, empty apartment waiting for me upstairs. I thought about the grayscale life I had been living. And I thought about the vibrant, warm realness of the man standing in front of me. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. Taking a shaky breath, I closed the small distance between us. I reached out and gently touched his arm. The muscle there was solid, firm beneath his jacket. "Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just watched me, waiting. And then, I did the bravest thing I have ever done in my entire life. I leaned in and kissed him. It was not a perfect kiss. It was clumsy, hesitant, my lips meeting his with a soft, uncertain pressure. For a terrifying second, he didn't respond, and my heart plummeted. I thought, I've misread everything. Again, I started to pull back, a hot wave of shame washing over me. But then his hand came up, cradling the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my freshly cut hair. He didn't pull me closer, not yet. He just held me there, his lips against mine. And then, he kissed me back. It was a slow, deliberate kiss. It was not rushed or hungry. It was a kiss of confirmation, of recognition. It tasted of beer and something that was uniquely him, a taste of warmth and safety. His lips were soft, his stubble a faint, pleasant scratch against my skin. It was 1,000 times better than anything I had imagined in my weeks of obsessive fantasy. This was real. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hand was still in my hair, a comforting, possessive weight. "You're full of surprises, Leo," he murmured, his voice thick. "I'm tired of being quiet," I whispered, my own voice trembling. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his dark eyes soft in the streetlight. Good. That single word was a promise. It was an acceptance. It was the start of something new. He didn't push for more. He didn't ask to come up. He seemed to understand that for me, this single, honest kiss was a monumental step. He walked me to the door, his hand now resting on the small of my back, a warm, protective presence. He waited until I had unlocked it. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a vague promise. It was a statement of fact. "Okay," I breathed. He leaned in and gave me one more soft, brief kiss. "Get some sleep." Then he turned and walked away, his silhouette disappearing down the quiet street. I stood in my doorway for a long time, my fingers pressed to my lips, the ghost of his kiss still tingling on my skin. I closed the door to my apartment, and for the first time since I had moved in, the silence that greeted me wasn't empty. It was filled with the promise of a phone call. It was filled with hope. The grayscale had been shattered, and in its place was the beginning of a vibrant, terrifying, beautiful new color. I had finally opened up, and it was better than I ever could have imagined. The next morning, I woke up to a world that felt fundamentally altered. The sunlight filtering through my blinds seemed brighter, the air in my apartment less stale. The lingering silence was no longer a weight but a canvas, waiting to be filled. I made coffee, and the familiar ritual felt new, charged with anticipation. I kept glancing at my phone, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath my skin. He had said he would call. I believed him, but a lifetime of caution had taught my anxiety to be a persistent beast. What if he regretted it? What if, in the sober light of day, he decided he'd made a mistake? What if last night was just a pleasant, but temporary, departure from the norm? My mind, my old and treacherous friend, started to spin its familiar webs of doubt. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a text, not a call, from an unknown number. Morning. Hope the hangover isn't too bad. J. Simple. Casual. Perfect. It wasn't a declaration of undying love. It was a quiet confirmation. It was real. A wide, incredulous smile spread across my face. I saved his number, my fingers slightly clumsy. Julian. The name in my contacts list looked solid, real. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something equally simple. No hangover. Just a lot of coffee. Morning. I hit send, my thumb hovering over the button for a second too long. A moment later, 3 dots appeared. He was typing. Good. I'm opening the shop now. But I was thinking, are you busy tonight? My breath hitched. This was it. The continuation. Not a fizzle, but a deliberate move forward. No, not busy. There's a place I want to show you. It's a bit of a drive. I can pick you up after I close up here. Around 7. Okay. Yes. That sounds great. See you then, Leo. I put my phone down, my hand trembling slightly. A date. A real date. It was happening. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous excitement. I tried to work, but the spreadsheets were just a meaningless jumble of characters. My focus was entirely on 7 p.m. At 6:30, I was standing in front of my closet, gripped by a familiar panic. What do you wear on a date with a man who exudes an effortless, timeless cool? Everything I owned suddenly seemed bland, inadequate. I finally settled on a pair of dark jeans and a simple, well-fitting black sweater. It felt honest. It felt like me. At 7 o'clock sharp, my buzzer rang. My stomach did a nervous flip. I took one last look in the mirror, ran a hand through my hair, his haircut, and went to let him in. He was standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall, looking just as incredible as he had in the pub. He wore a worn leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt, and his hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just showered. He smelled clean, of soap and that same subtle, woody cologne. Hey, he said, his eyes doing a slow, appreciative sweep from my shoes to my face. You ready? Ready, I confirmed, my voice a little breathless. His truck was an old, beautifully maintained Ford, the kind of vehicle that looked like it had stories to tell. The inside smelled of leather and coffee. He had a classic rock station playing low on the radio. It all felt so perfectly him. We drove out of the city, leaving the bright lights and noise behind. The sky deepened to a dark indigo, and the streetlights gave way to the occasional lonely farmhouse porch light. He drove with an easy, one-handed confidence, his other arm resting on the open window. Where are we going? I finally asked, unable to contain my curiosity. You'll see, he said with a mysterious smirk. Trust me, I think I have to, I replied, and the honesty of the statement hung in the air between us. After another 20 minutes, he turned off the main road and onto a winding dirt track that led into a thicket of trees. I felt a flicker of unease, the city boy in me screaming about secluded areas and horror movie plots. But one look at the calm, steady profile of the man next to me and it vanished. I did trust him. He parked the truck at the edge of a small clearing that overlooked a wide, still lake. The moon was nearly full, casting a shimmering silver path across the water. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and completely quiet. This is it, he said, killing the engine. This is my quiet place. We got out of the truck. He went to the truck bed and pulled out a thick wool blanket and a thermos. I figured it might get cold, he said, handing me the thermos. It was warm. We spread the blanket on the dry grass near the water's edge and sat down. He was right. The air was cooler out here, crisp and clean. He sat close, our shoulders and knees brushing. The small points of contact felt electric in the cool night air. He opened the thermos and poured 2 steaming cups of what smelled like hot chocolate, rich and dark. He handed one to me, our fingers brushing. So, I said, cradling the warm mug. This is where you come to get away from it all. Yeah, he said, looking out at the water. When the city gets too loud, or my head gets too loud, I come out here, just to sit, to breathe. He turned to look at me, his face illuminated by the soft moonlight. I wanted to share it with you. The gesture was so intimate, so deeply personal. He hadn't taken me to a fancy restaurant or a crowded bar. He had brought me to his sanctuary. He had shared his silence with me. It's beautiful, I said, my voice thick with emotion. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while, sipping our hot chocolate, watching the moonlight on the water. It wasn't an empty silence or an awkward one. It was a shared silence, full and peaceful. It felt like coming home. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. He put his mug down and turned to face me fully. "I need to be clear about something." My heart rate picked up. The mood had shifted, become more serious. "I'm not looking for a casual thing," he said, his gaze direct and unflinching. "I haven't been for a long time. I'm too old for games, and I've got too much past to waste time on something that isn't real." He reached out, his hand covering mine where it rested on the blanket. "What I feel when I'm with you, it feels real. And it scares the hell out of me. But I'm not going to run from it." His confession, his vulnerability, was a mirror to my own. He was laying his cards on the table, offering me the same honesty and clarity he valued in his work, in his life. "I'm scared too," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Everything about this is new to me. For a long time, I thought that quiet, lonely life was all there was for me. I accepted it. I looked at our hands, his strong, calloused fingers intertwined with my own. "You make me want more." He moved closer, his other hand coming up to cup my cheek, his thumb stroking my jawline in that way that was now so achingly familiar. "Good," he murmured. "Because I want more with you." He leaned in and kissed me. Under the vast, starry sky, next to the still, silent water, it felt like the first kiss all over again, but deeper, more certain. It was a kiss that sealed a promise. There was no more ambiguity, no more subtext to decipher. There was only this. Us. We stayed there for hours, talking, kissing, and just being quiet together. He told me more about his past, and I told him more about my own fears and my hopes for a future I was only just beginning to believe I could have. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had. The drive back to the city was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of two people who had found a shared rhythm, a common language that didn't always require words. When he walked me to my door this time, there was no hesitation. He followed me inside. My apartment, which had for so long been a fortress of my solitude, welcomed him in. It didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt right. He didn't stay the night. We just stood in my small living room, holding each other. It was enough. To feel his arms around me, to rest my head on his chest, and hear the steady, strong beat of his heart. It was everything. Before he left, he kissed me one last time, a long, slow, deep kiss that left me dizzy. "I'll see you soon," he promised. "Tomorrow?" I asked, the question slipping out, needy and hopeful. He smiled against my lips. Tomorrow, after he was gone, I stood in the middle of my living room, the scent of him still lingering in the air. The silence was back, but it was completely transformed. It was no longer the sound of emptiness. It was the sound of a held breath, of a new beginning, of a life that was finally opening up. And it was better than I could have ever dreamed. The quiet intimacy was no longer a sign of loneliness, but a space for something new to grow. I looked around the room, at the familiar gray walls and the worn sofa, and saw it all for what it was, the before. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that everything from this moment on would be the after. I was no longer just an observer of my own life. I was living it, and I wasn't alone anymore. I had come home.